So there was no safe place anywhere for African Americans, for whites, for enlisted men, for commanding officers. There was no safe place in the field or on the barracks. I know you have a poem about that.
Yeah. This poem is titled Rocket Attack.
Yes.
Rocket attack. Sirens scream. A card table hangs for an instant in the air. Kicked by a retreating player. The screen door slams and the hooch is empty. 12 men scramble into the guts of the bunker. Bodies pressed into the sandy floor. Scared men telling jokes.
Another frightening image. Did friends of yours die?
Yes, Mark. I had a number of friends die in Vietnam. The first man that I can remember dying in Vietnam was a man named Jesus Escabeto, I think.
Escabeto, yeah.
And he was killed in a helicopter crash along with a number of other men. I don't know whether it was a crash or they were shot down, but they never returned. And that was the closest man to me. It was the first person that I knew.
And what was that like for you?
It brought the reality of war right directly home. There was an empty bunk, several bunks that were empty.
Several at the same time.
And so that really brought the reality of war home to me. I think that was the first powerful experience to know that I was here and people did not return.
This was no John Wayne movie.
No.
You have a poem about this?
Yeah, this particular poem, I titled it Escabeto, and I'd like to read it. Escabeto. Rotors spank the air, the green wasp lifts from the jungle flowers of Vietnam. Crawling in her thorax and abdomen, men with wings on their chests, stamped from cheap metal. Their .50 calibers rained onto the treetops, while flicks of soft light flowed up from the jungle below, rising in the silence of engine roar, to explode through her thin green skin. Tracer rounds dissect the space, entering, exiting into the soft life within. Oil flows, blood flows, rotors spank the air. The green wasp sinks into the jungle flowers of Vietnam. Cheap metal wings beat against beating chests as they make their last descent.
Larry, do you have...
you mean to me.
Larry, do you have post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, Mark, I think I do. I'm certainly probably not suffering as much from that distress as other men, as men that fought in the jungle, but I have my own dealings with that issue myself. There are still memories that I recall. There are still impulses and reflexes that I have that come directly out of the war. There's still memories that I haven't been able to put to rest and let them settle back in the history of my mind.
And what is it about this horrific experience that makes for a post-traumatic stress disorder? What's your understanding of this illness?
My understanding is that when something happens to such on a traumatic level that it is never allowed to rest in your psyche. It stays there on a sort of a constant basis. It's there on a daily basis.
Almost like an undigested piece of experience.
Exactly. It's like you've eaten something and it simply will not digest. It's going to affect your appetite. It's going to affect your presence on a constant basis.
And it rises up, these feelings, again and again?
It constantly rises up. The one thing that has been helpful in my work with the post-traumatic stress is to be able to write poetry, to be able to tell the story,
Tell the story.
and to get some of this feeling out,
As we're doing now.
as we're doing now.
And your work with the vets also is about getting them to get this material out.
I think that
Somehow
this is,
chew it,
it's
digest
really
it.
important to be able to tell your community what the experience was like for you. I
Yes.
think the healing, the wound happens in community, and the healing happens in community.
Tell me about coming home.
This is part of the anger that still lives in me, this particular poem.
You have anger in you?
Very much so. And I think part of this trip is to try to put, the trip back to Vietnam is to try to put some of this anger at rest so I can feel at peace with myself. and the
Anger
world.
towards?
Anger towards the enemy. Anger towards myself. Anger towards authority. All of these things are very important for me to examine again. And I think I'm mature enough at this point in my life to examine this. This particular poem that I want to read it was inspired by the ticker tape parade that went on in New York City some 15 to 20 years after Vietnam was over. A parade that probably should have happened in the 70s.
Should have happened.
Should have happened. So this poem was inspired out of that, and I titled this poem, Dear John.
Please.
Dear John, now it's the style, it's the vogue. Now writers are writing about blood that's nothing but dry dust. Kids are wearing jungle suits to school with no bullet holes in them, but they're pumping plastic M16s. Now it's the rage, 'cause the rage in the vet is old. Tears and beers have grown a cataract over eyes that once cited M60s. Now, step up, it's hip. After 19 years down the road, it's safe to slap him on the back. His medals are hidden, family broken. Remember, he was the hot cat, the baby killer, who slipped into the darkness of the 70s to cool. Now, he's back slapping leather down the main drag, with ticker tape in his gray hair. The media grinds one last dry hump out of him. Now, stand closer, 'cause Rambo has made you brave. Raise your hand and slap a thanks gig on the boys. Not so many now. 58 laid down in the Nam, over 58,000 laid down here at home. Suicide man, our kids know about that. Now let's thank our boys for selling those hearts and minds so cheap, so we could keep what we could keep.
It's a powerful mix here. You're talking the return from Vietnam, rage and anger, like this poem, and a funny kind of longing for closeness that can't be had again. How do people put this together, your buddies, your friends? How do they integrate this?
I think, Mark, we're just beginning to figure out how to do that. It's some 20-some years after the war, and finally society has been able to turn its head back and look at these issues. And I believe it's at this particular point that we can begin to understand how to heal some of these wounds. And part of my trip back to Vietnam has to do with understanding this better.
And what do you want to do in going back? What would you like to accomplish, Larry Winters?
I would like to be able to unmask the enemy, both the Viet Cong enemy and the enemy that still lives within myself.
Good luck, my friend.
Thank you, Mark.
She's